have some steady followers, it looks like, in the chat there. And I just want to personally thank everybody for coming here and just taking part in our trainings. I was with Todd up in Orlando earlier this week, and I was able to just watch and witness him work firsthand. So that's always fun. But my goal today is to reinforce what you probably already know, and possibly teach you something new. Those are my goals for today, and hopefully I can accomplish that. So what I have in front of me now is I have the Samsung HVAC website. And the reason why I want to show this to you first is primarily because one of the best sources or resources for information when it comes to Samsung is going to be this website. And a lot of the information that that you're going to need, or if you can't get a hold of me or you can't get a hold of Samsung tech support, a lot of the questions that you may have can be answered through this Samsung website. So it's very important that you know how to navigate this, and you're able to utilize this reference when your guys are out in the field or you are personally working on a system. So when you go to samsunghvac.com, you're going to see this page. What I'm going to direct you to today is going to be the training and support section. This is where you're going to find some technical videos. You can verify registration if you're not using the app. There's a lot of information here, frequently asked questions, but today we're going to use technical documents. Once you go to technical documents, you're going to scroll down. If you have a model number, you can go ahead and place the model number in this section in order to speed up the search. But I do have to let you know you have to use the full model number. If you don't use the full model number, it's not going to give you any results. So for today, we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to go to single and multi-zone mini splits. And we're going to just keep going, single multi-zone mini splits. But if you look, you have your discontinued systems. So if you need to get information on those, you're still able to. And now we have your single zone high walls, cassettes, ducted, your free joint multis, your outdoors, residential, and so on, discontinued as well. But we're just going to stick to the high wall. You have your wind free, your quantum, your wind free, your max heat. As you can see, just about everything that they offer, you're going to be able to find information on here. Okay, you have pictures if you need to show somebody pictures. What's even more important is you have your matchups here. It's always good to verify your matchups. You don't want to install a system and find out it's not a match. Your wire controllers, quick guides, service bulletins, your installation manual, French, English, and Spanish, your user manual, and your submittals, which we're going to go to in just a minute. But for right now, oh wait, I just want to show you this too. If you scroll down, you have exploded parts views. What's good about this, you can go ahead and get the part numbers before you call the distributor to help speed up the process, and has a good breakdown of everything. So close that. And now we're going to go to the installation manual. 90% of the questions that I get asked over the phone could be answered through this website. All this is available also on the app. It's just a slightly different trying to navigate, obviously, because it's an app. I do use this website on my phone because it does tend to make it a little easier for me. And then we're going to go to content. So today what we're focusing on, as I mentioned, we're talking about leaks, especially in mini splits, specifically in mini split. And some of the most common issues that I've come across, not just with the technical sports side, now that I've been working with Tropic Supply, but also myself, having crews in the field and diagnosing and doing installs. There's nothing worse than have to go back to a job site because of a Freon leak that could have easily been avoided if proper steps were taken. So today we are going to be looking at, let's see here, connecting refrigerant pipes. I'm going to move this. Okay, connecting refrigerant pipes is page 15. Okay, so most of the basic stuff that everybody should know, right? Not crossing over the pipes. And what I want to show you is here are your torque specs. It's going to give you a good range. Your 1/4 inch, 10 to 13 foot-pounds of torque, 3/8, 25 to 30, 1/2 inch, and 5/8, all there for you. So if you're not sure, if you are using torque wrenches, this is a very important resource for you. Honestly, I didn't use torque wrenches for the majority of my time installing mini splits. So I'm not saying not to use them, but most people don't have them. After using them, I can say that is very important, especially if you got some technicians that don't have much experience making a good flare connection. This torque wrench is going to give you a peace of mind. You set it, it clicks, and you forget about it. It's going to be sealed. As long as they did a proper flare, you don't have to worry about being over tightened or under tightened. It's very useful. Actually, Todd Sutherland was the first person to really stress to me how important it is. And once I started using it, I didn't stop. So I highly recommend investing in a torque wrench. Okay, next page we're going to go to is going to be page 22. And this is where we're going to talk about our leak testing. Now, if you joined us for the vacuum Todd Talk earlier this week, you'll already know that your vacuum comes after your high pressure leak test. So Samsung recommends almost like a triple pressure test. They recommend you testing at 200 PSI, check it for soap bubbles, waiting 10 minutes, then going 400 and going to 600. And in all reality, like I was a contractor and I did several installs myself, and we're in a hurry a lot of times trying to get the job done. It's getting late. I recommend at minimum testing 600 PSI. If you don't have the time to do the 200, 400, and 600, just slowly ramp it up to 600 PSI. Hopefully you're not alone on the job, or your guys aren't alone on the job. They can have one guy looking for leaks or listening for leaks and then spraying down the joints with bubbles. I recommend soaking the flare joints with bubbles before you start the pressure test. So that way, as it's starting to fill the system, you may not hear it, but the bubbles are a great visual indicator of a leak. And we're going to see that a little later today. So as I mentioned, your final pressure test should be at 600 PSI, and take your time and listen and use the bubbles and try to see if there's no leak. If there's no leak, then all bets are off, you're good. Just go ahead and put that vacuum on and follow the best practice procedures as Todd Sutherland showed us earlier this week. So next, I want to go to a very valuable source of information are your submittals. Now you'll see it has a submittal for just about every combination that they're going to offer, but we're going to go ahead and use this one, the 09. So this is your submittal. It's going to show you your matchup. It's going to give you its BTU heating and cooling range. It's going to show you power source, your dimensions, operating temperatures, pipe connections. It's going to show your maximum vertical separation. All this stuff is very useful, especially prior to installation. We're going to look under refrigerant here. Now, obviously, it shows you the type. And now it shows you your factory charge, which on the 09 is 35 ounces, 35.3 ounces. And it's charged for 25 feet. Additional refrigerant, this is very important to pay attention to, because I've been finding a lot of installers grossly overcharging their systems because they're not focusing on that decimal point. They are just 16 ounces, 1 ounce per square foot. They're just really not paying attention. And I've seen guys adding additional ounce per foot of piping. Obviously, that's grossly overcharged, and you're going to have compressor startup issues. It's not going to work properly. If it does even start, it's just not going to work right. And with these systems, what's critical to understand is that you're not charging to your gauge pressure. Ideally, you want to charge to by weighing in the system. I call it a critical charge. If you've worked in refrigeration, then you already understand the concept. But the proper charge in these systems is crucial to a proper working system. So with this system, 0.6 ounce. See, there you go. It's very easy to get that confused. But 0.16 ounce per foot, additional foot there. So that being said, if you are on a 35-foot line set, you could just take that decimal mover and you're only going to want 1.6 ounces. Very important to pay attention to that. Another great thing about these submittals is it shows you all your accessories. It gives you the part numbers. So if you're looking for a wire controller, you have your options. Your thermostat adapter, you have all your options here, and it's going to make it easier for you to be able to order these parts and have all those numbers available when you call the local branch. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and switch cameras, and we're going to do some hands-on because you don't want to see me navigating this website all day. Oh, that's a close-up view of my face. You don't want to see that. There we go. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Nicole, can you hear me?
Yes, but you need to stop sharing your other screen.
Oh, man. Okay. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. All righty. One thing, I'm not a fan of PowerPoints. I'm more a fan of the hands-on. So hopefully you guys are as well. Okay, so let's get started here. What I want to start with is what not to use. It's very important that we're not adding anything into the system. These are items we don't use. If you got a leak, find the leak. Do not use these in a mini split system. It's going, yeah, it may work, right? You may get away with it, but it's highly recommended that you stay away from any kind of leak stop. Just take the time, find the leak, and fix the leak, repair the leak. Hopefully, something I offer you today, you'll be able to learn something new and avoid install mistakes, so that way you won't have to use these leak sealants. Another thing you don't want to use, leak stop or leak lock. When I was working with the family business, my dad he loved this stuff. He put it on every flare joint that you could possibly imagine. Did we have leaks? Yeah, we had leaks. But the worst thing about it is serviceability. Once you put this leak lock on, it just makes life miserable if you ever have to redo the flare or just move the system or any connection. So if you do a proper flare, you're not going to need this. So that's very important as well. Another thing is, don't use these to do your flares, right? Use a proper wrench, use a proper crescent wrench, adjustable wrench, whatever you call it. There's 3 names for everything in air conditioning. So you don't want to use your channel locks at all whatsoever, making a flare, because you're just not going to get a good bite on it, and you're going to you're going to scar up the flare, and later on when you have to take it off, and you're going to have to use a pair of vice grips. It's going to make your life miserable. Another thing that I've been finding, and I've got a couple phone calls on, a lot of guys are using these to open up the valves in the mini splits. One of the things that I really hope you remember today are that mini splits are metric. They use metric Allen heads.
So, or hex keys, whatever you want to call it. So this 3/16, it does kind of fit, right? It really does kind of fit. And just to kind of show you a comparison, this is a 3/16 and this is a 5 mil. I mean, they're almost identical, but the 5 mil is just slightly larger. So what I found that a couple guys, they're having trouble opening up the valves on the unit, and they're stripping out the service port. They're stripping that out, and then they can't get it open. One gentleman, he said he was in there, he couldn't get it open. He was stripped out. He was actually able to get the right size metric into the service valve, and he was able to crack it open. So it's very important that you guys use the right, and I believe the right size. And I believe that on most are going to be 5 millimeter. So you get a good metric wrench. You don't even need to carry a multiple one like this. You could just get a one long Allen wrench and just kind of keep it in your tool bag. But that's something that I've been coming across lately, is that guys are using a 3/16 to open the valve, and they really should be using a metric 5 millimeter. So that's something that you guys want to maybe jot down or take a mental note. Another thing that I want to show you guys as well is if you do have to braze, okay, it's not that you can't braze mini splits. I just typically don't recommend it, because we all know the carbon buildup if you don't low flow nitrogen. This is a great little regulator. We offer it at Tropic, and it makes your life easier. You don't have to try to set it. It has a low flow nitrogen setting, and if you don't have this regulator, you can do it with a regular regulator. But if you've never low flow nitrogen before, there's plenty of videos on YouTube. You need to start low flowing nitrogen every time you braze, especially with all the new equipment that's coming out lately. The tolerances are smaller. You have your micro channel coils. Everything is not as forgiving as it used to be. So getting used to low flowing nitrogen, or teaching your guys, or even check up on them if they're doing the install and they're starting to braze. Go out to the job site and check on them. Make sure they're low flowing nitrogen. And like I said, you can hear that it's barely anything. First, you want to purge the system of any air, and then being your low flow. But just something I want to mention that is vital: if you do have to solder or braze a joint with mini splits, you have to do this. You really do. Can you get away with not doing it? I'm sure you may get lucky, but just low flow nitrogen. Just make your life simple and headache free. This is what we're going to be using when I do all my leak tests. I always use Big Blue first. Anytime you go to a job and you have a leak, you don't need to bust out your leak detector first. Take your time, go through the system, look for oil. Add some extra, if there's no Freon in the system, add some extra pressure to try to listen or look for a leak first. A visual inspection is oftentimes all that's really needed, especially on your bigger leaks. With mini splits, you're going to be looking at your flare connections. And I always suggest that with the mini split, prior to startup, you take the cover off the evaporator as well, to listen to the coil and try to see if there's a leak, or inspect the coil to see if there's a leak in the coil as well. But this Big Blue works great. What I've noticed that I like about this over a lot of the other ones is that you get these little micro bubbles. They're little tiny suds that will build up. And with the other leak detectors, they're the liquid leak bubbles. I don't notice as a good a result as finding those really small leaks as I do with this Big Blue. So this is a very useful tool to have, or useful thing to have in your truck. Leak detectors. There are different type of leak detectors. This is a heated diode leak detector. This is probably I would say this is my favorite. I've been using one of these since I started almost 30 years ago. And it's just kind of tried and true. It works great as long as you take care of it. Maintaining your tools is going to be one of the most vital things that you can teach your guys or do yourself. And understanding how leak detectors work. If you're using a heated diode, or if you're using an infrared, whatever leak detector, it's important to read the manual. And what's interesting is if you look at this right here, it says always read user manual, and has an exclamation point. So, and of course you want to register it as well. But with these, a lot of times, and these are a lot of things that a lot of us get, I don't know, kind of complacent, or we just take things for granted that people know these things. And I'm just finding that sometimes I'm having to state some of the things that I think are obvious, but they're not always obvious, because either they learned in a rush, they were installing, or they never went to school and was trained. I never went to a technical school. I was trained in the field, so I learned by my mistakes, and I made a lot of them. But one of the important things about a leak detector is maintaining it. You have a little filter here, and I recommend changing that filter, checking it regularly. You don't have to change it every time, but it's important that you make sure it's clean. That way you can maintain and you can find those leaks, especially those small leaks. With these, what's great about this unit here is that it has a vial where you can calibrate the system in the field. So if you're not sure if it's working properly, it always has something that you can calibrate right there in the field. And this one, like unlike the old one that I used to have a long time ago, it has a battery and it's rechargeable, so you don't necessarily need to be plugged in. So very, very good tool. Now I'm going to work my way. Actually, you know what? Before I work my way into some of the things that I recommend using to help you guys prevent leaks, I wanted to show you what, and I wanted to show you actually last time I did my mini split talk, I wanted to show you guys exactly what the EEV valve looks like on the inside. So this is an EEV, electronic expansion valve, and basically how it works is it's opens and closes by unscrewing. It opens the valve, and then this is what it looks like, just like a little needle valve. It just slides in here. So that being said, if you're looking down at this, clockwise will tighten, counterclockwise will open. If you get a little magnet, I usually recommend go to Autoport store, and you can, a lot of times, if you're take the top off the system, and there's usually a bulb over this, as you see, I cut it off. But a lot of times what you can do is you take that magnet, if you're not sure the EEV is stuck, and this basically applies to almost every EEV that I know of, you can take that magnet and you can just work your way around that bulb, and it should open the valve if you're going counterclockwise, and it'll close it if you're going clockwise. So it's just a helpful tool for you guys to help diagnose if you're having a system that just seems to be pumping down, or some type of restriction here. And you can obviously check the stator, but you may want to see if it's locked up. And the best way to see if it's locked up in the field is just take a magnet, go around. You should be able to open it. But if you're using these kind of sealants or any kind of additive, that can definitely gum up and clog these EEVs. So I guess that would be something you may want to just try to avoid altogether. Now, Nylog blue. I know some people don't say not to use it, just use a little POE oil or something on the flares. I've had good results. I've never had a problem using a Nylog blue. I usually, and I'll show you a little later, I'll put it on the flare on the inside. I'll put it on the surface of my my flaring tool as well to help lubricate and make sure we get a good flare. And then we have our flare seals. When in doubt, these work great. I had a job, this was maybe, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, where we installed, I'd probably say about 15 ducted units and high wall units into a dorm area. And I had my guys out there, and I did all this training with them, but they're working fast. They're trying to get the job done, because time is money at the end of the day. I swear, it was like clockwork. Every month we would get a call and we would say, all right, apartment 1's down. Fix that one. A week or two, maybe a month later, apartment 10's down. The guys were just rushing. They're going through the job. They're trying to bang it out. And it causes, you rush to get the job done that day, but you're going to pay for it in the long run. What I did, I didn't want to deal with the chance of having them make another mistake in doing the flares. I would send them back with flare seals. And from my experience, every time we went back with a flare seal with my guys, and they never had to go back. So these, I definitely have a great, I have a good experience with these. These work really well. Another thing I want to show you as well is, if you were with us on the Todd Talk, Todd showed you the core removal tool. This is very helpful. It comes in a 5/16 for the mini splits, and this is going to speed up your evacuation process tremendously. And I just want to show you, because I saw a couple questions on exactly how it works, or at least it seemed like some people were not too curious or kind of curious on how they work. And I'll be honest with you, I never used one of these until maybe like a year or two ago. I never used them before. Heck, up to like 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't even know they existed. So just to be honest with you. So you have two parts. You have this is going to remove the core. As you can see, it's a core removal tool. And then you have your ball valve and the part that hooks up into the system. There is no valve depressor here, so we're going to have to worry about that, but you're going to want to start with this together. And you screw that together like this. Now, you have your service valve here. You just screw this on. Okay, now what's good about this, if you notice, when this also has a side port here, this side port does have a core in it. So that way, once you remove this core, you still will have access to the system. So this is a good place to put a micron gauge when you're doing putting a vacuum on a mini split, because on most mini splits you only have one port. So if you put this core depressor on there, now you have no access port. So you can put your micron gauge here, because I'll show you, when you go to remove your core, you're going to want to slide this in and try to find where that is. And once you found where it is, it clicks. A lot of times you want to make sure you push it in to where, if you heard that click, and that's going to lock that core into the core removal tool. So when you unscrew it, now when there's pressure, this will kind of shoot. It's not going to shoot out, but it is going to slide out. Once you slide this out, you're going to want to close this valve, and that's going to close the flow of Freon. So it's going to block this section of the core removal tool from this section. So you still have an open path into the system to do your vacuum or charging, but now you can remove your core, and there's your core, your shredded core. Now you have another access port here. So you can hook your vacuum pump here, have your micron gauge here, and then open the system, run your vacuum. And once you've achieved your vacuum, then you can close this. You can add your Schrader port back in, and then you can work on the system as normal. Now there is going to be pressure once you. And it's very important that if you understand there's a valve here, so you're not going to be able to put that core back in unless you open the valve. There is going to be pressure. It's not that great of pressure. You'll be fine. And then take this off. And then your core is going to be back in. And then your core is back in. Before I move on to the next thing, another thing I want to let you guys know is, I would honestly say about at least 50% of the jobs that I go out to when I do job site visits, if I've been to a job site visit with you, maybe pay attention next time. When I come up to the system, one of the first things I do is I go with my hand and I do this. And I do this. I usually don't say anything until I leave and say, listen, you need to make sure you tighten those. But in my head, I'm like, okay, come on, guys, just take a little more time, because they don't always leak, right? These are pretty reliable. They don't usually leak, but sometimes they do. So why risk it? Why have that headache and have to come back just because you forgot, or you guys forgot to tighten these? It's very important that we tighten these. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to something that is another point that I really want to drive home today, is use of probes, especially in mini splits. And in a second, I'm going to show you why. When you have the probe, you don't have much Freon loss. This is kind of the rig I got, so I can tap into the system. I have a port if I need to add Freon, and then it makes the system pretty easy. You can arrange whatever type of system you want by going to Tropic and finding some tees. I've seen some people use these short hoses. That's fine, because it's not that long of a hose. But what I really want to show you here today, and this is very important. So when we think back, when I was looking at the submittal, and any length over 25 foot on most mini split systems, especially Samsung is what we're talking about, an additional charge is 0.1 0.6 ounce. So that's a 1/10 of an ounce. This is a gauge set. I kind of wrapped it up just so it would fit on the scale. The reason why I'm doing this is I want to show you how much Freon a gauge manifold set can hold. And it's very important, right? Because if you hook your gauges up to a system, you're filling all the gauges, you're filling the manifold. Typically, you're not going to fill the whole manifold, but you'll see very quickly here when I show you, you're going to lose Freon. And normally, when you're working on residential systems, it doesn't seem to affect us much. We put our gauges on over and over again, 3 or 4 times, but you don't know how many times somebody put their gauges on a system. So by all means, if you installed the system or your guys installed the system, just do your best to not use these manifold style systems with these long hoses. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and open this valve up, and we're gonna put Freon into this gauge set here. So if you notice, I'm at 0, and now we're gonna go ahead and fill this up. All right, so we have 5 ounces. 5 ounces of Freon that can fill this. That's actually going up a little bit too as it starts to equalize and pour into the gauge set. There's 5 ounces of Freon. So say if you're only filling one hose, you divide that by 3, it's still over an ounce of Freon you're removing from the system. So if you just weighed in for an extra 10 feet and you put your gauge set on, right? Now you're fine there, and you go back, you put your gauge set on to go check the system during your maintenance. Well, you just removed your additional charge. Actually, more than your additional charge. If you fill up the whole set, you're 5 ounces. So now your system is undercharged. But you put your gauges on, and the guy goes on, and he goes on to the next job, and the next guy comes, he puts his gauges on, and before you know it, you're just sucking that Freon out of the systems. The compressor on the mini splits, they're going to try to compensate because it's not going to give you an automatic, hey, I'm low. But if you put your gauges on these systems, just realize that, well, actually at the end of the result, we had 6 ounces total Freon inside this gauge set. So that's I would say about 2 ounces per hose. So it's just very important that we're especially working on mini splits or any critical charge type system, invest in these probes, because you're not going to have to worry about that. You can put it on, especially if you just want to check your pressures. You don't need to have this connector on there. I recommend at minimum just putting a anti-blowback fitting on there, and then you can put your anti-blowback fitting on there, and you're going to have little to no loss whatsoever. So this is extremely important that I can just hammer this in to you guys and stress it. I can't stress it enough that you can be grossly overcharging the system if you're not calculating your additional charge, but there's a good chance you could be undercharged because you guys have hooked their gauges up, or you've hooked their gauges up 2 or 3 times, and now you're low on Freon. And I get, hey, well, we weighed it in. Well, we weighed it in, but how many times has somebody checked the Freon since you weighed it in? So very vital, very important. Now, I'm going to work my way over here. I'm going to show you the flare tool that I'd like to use. There are other flare tools out there. If you're not familiar with these, this is one by JB, but there are several versions of this. Yellow Jacket offers this version as well. It comes with a flaring block right here. I recommend getting one of these. And actually, I learned this from Rami Musa from Samsung. He did a video the other day. And I never thought about using one of these, but this is a spark plug gapper, and it has all your measurements on there. So you can look, and depending on the size copper, what I would recommend doing is just kind of writing on the back of here, depending on the copper, how much the copper needs to extend, because when you do these flares, you want the copper to extend slightly past, so in order you can get a nice flare seal. It's just a helpful tool that you can keep with your flare toolkit to help you make sure you make the correct flare. Now with this flare tool, I usually recommend just 1 drop. When using a Nylog or anything, just 1 little drop is all. You don't want to overdo it. But what's great about this flare tool is if you look, well, let me see if I can do it so you can see it well. But if you look, it kind of has that kind of like elliptical, or whatever you want to call it, rotation there. So it's going to make a nice smooth flare as it works its way, and it clicks. It'll click stop when it's done. so you don't have to worry about overdoing your flares. But what's important about the depth of the flare, I got 2 flares here. I don't know if you could tell by looking at it, but this one is, you don't have as much gasket surface or seal surface as you do on this one. And that typically is caused by not tightening the flare block enough. So what happens is as you start to make the flare, the copper starts to slide into the flare block, or just not measuring it correctly. So just so you can see the difference here, I have a flare nut. And if you look, I don't know how clear that is, but there's a lot of space there, right? A lot of space. Now, with the other one, this is how your flare should look. That flare should take up almost the whole, if you see that flare, it takes almost the whole space in there, and then just work your way back. So you're gonna have a really good wide seal to help prevent any leaks in the future. So highly recommend. As simple as making a flare is, there's a ton of videos out there. I recommend watching them, but nothing is going to replace hands-on. You can watch videos until you're brain dead, and it's not going to do you any good if you don't get out there and you don't do it yourself. Now these are the flare gaskets that I mentioned earlier. They come in different sizes, and you're just going to put it on. It's going to click on, and it's going to sit on that surface. And then with these flare gaskets, you don't use nylon glue. Don't even use that. If you're using these flare gaskets, just make sure the surface is nice, clean, dry, and then put your flare on and make the same torque specifications as I mentioned earlier that you can find on the website, and then you'll be good to go. I have had great results with those. I never really had an issue where they still leaked. Another thing, talking about torque, I want to mention this. This is the torque wrench. And this is, I just really can't stress how much easier this is going to make your life. If you've never used a torque wrench, there are 2 different types of measurements. You have Newton meters, and then you have foot pounds. And basically all you do is you unlock it, and you're just going to turn it to whatever setting it has. It's all your different settings, and then you're in between settings, you have your numbers here. So if you're at 10, that would be 11, 12, and so on. So these ends are replaceable, they're interchangeable just by using, it comes with a little tool, and that comes out, and then you can just replace it. This torque wrench also comes with a ratchet end, so if you need to torque like bolts down on a compressor, you're able to do that as well. And actually, one of the last things I want to show you that, as I mentioned before, if you see this was a system that we got back from somebody, and you could definitely tell that they used some kind of channel lock or vice grip or something to hold this when they were doing their flares, because it's all scarred up. Unlike this side, fortunately they didn't, they left it alone. But one thing I want to show you is I'm going to put a little pressure into this, and we're going to just go ahead and get some bubbles. Another thing I want to mention is that I got pressure in here right now. You don't hear anything. So the ear test is useful, but it's not the most accurate. So that's why we always recommend using some bubbles. And you can see that it's bubbling right there, and it'll just keep building bubbles and bubbles and bubbles. So do your pressure tests. Go ahead and check them with some type. It doesn't have to be Big Blue, but I definitely recommend Big Blue, because what I like about Big Blue is that over time, if it's a smaller leak, they will build like micro bubbles, and you will see little tiny suds on the copper. So it's definitely very useful. It works really well. Some of the other leak detector solutions that I've used out there, like Palmolive, right? We all use a little Palmolive in water. It doesn't work that well, and you really don't get that consistent viscosity that the Big Blue will provide. So, but that is just about all I have. As I mentioned, this was a little quicker. Most of these tools and everything can be purchased at Tropic, but more than anything, I just want to hammer through how important it is to start upgrading your tools and getting these low loss fittings and making some common mistakes that we all make, right? I still make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes, but if we can help minimize those mistakes, it's going to make your life a lot easier, and it's just going to make everybody happy, right? You're not going to be upset at the equipment, and you're not going to be upset at you guys, because hey, we're all doing the right thing, and time is money at the end of the day. So I don't have anything else. I'm going to switch the camera back over, if that's okay.
Sure. You want to get into the questions, the trivia questions?
I think that would be great.
Okay, can everybody see my
Alright.
screen?
Yep.
Okay, so everybody make sure you get your chat boxes open so we can get started with our quiz questions. All right, so question number 1, true or false? Samsung recommends a final high pressure leak test to be at 450 PSI. Okay, so question number 2, true or false? Samsung recommends the use of a sight glass to be installed on the liquid line to charge the system at startup. All right, so question number 3. At what point during an install is it recommended to add an additional Freon charge if needed? A, after the system runs for a few days. B, immediately after the high pressure leak test. C, when the line set in a vacuum prior to opening up the valve. D, putting the system into test cool and then adding enough Freon until you have achieve
125 PSI.
125. Question number 4. Over tightening a flare connection can cause A, a crack in the seal of the flare, B, the copper to push out of the flare, C, a permanent sealed flare connection that will not be serviceable in the future, D, all of the above, E, both A and B. All right, well, that's it for today. Unless anybody's got any questions.